In 1859, on Easter morning, an enslaved woman named Charity stood waist-deep in the Savannah River with 3 white children who had never done her any harm. But their father had done something so monstrous, so unforgivable, that Charity was willing to become a monster herself to balance the cosmic scales. What happened next would shake the very foundations of Christian faith and prove that sometimes the deepest baptisms require the deepest waters. Welcome back to Buried Truths, where we uncover the stories they buried and give voice to those they silenced. I'm about to take you into the darkest Easter story ever told, a tale of maternal love twisted into maternal vengeance, of Christian symbolism perverted into pagan justice, and of a woman who chose damnation over submission. This isn't just about revenge. This is about what happens when a mother's love becomes a mother's rage, and when Easter resurrection becomes Easter retribution. So ask yourself right now, if someone destroyed your children, would you destroy theirs? If someone stole your future, would you steal theirs? Keep that question burning in your mind, because by the end of Charity's story, you'll understand why some sins can only be cleansed with blood. The year 1859 found the American South basking in its final moments of cotton-white prosperity. But beneath the Easter Sunday church bells and morning prayers, something unholy was stirring. On the sprawling Thornton plantation along the Savannah River, a woman was about to redefine the meaning of resurrection, baptism, and divine justice in the most horrifying way imaginable. Charity wasn't born with that name. She was born Amara in West Africa, daughter of a river priestess who taught her the ancient ceremonies of water and purification. But at age 16, she was ripped from her homeland, chained in the belly of a slave ship, and delivered to Master Jonathan Thornton's plantation, where she was stripped of her name, her identity, and eventually, her humanity. They called her Charity because, as Master Thornton explained with his twisted sense of humor, it's Christian charity that keeps you fed and sheltered. For 12 years, Charity had served as the plantation's head laundress, spending her days by the river, washing the sins and stains from the white folks' clothes, while her own soul accumulated darker and darker and darker stains. She was known throughout the county for her skill with fabrics and her gentle way with children. The white children of neighboring plantations would often visit just to hear her tell stories by the riverbank, her musical voice weaving tales of faraway lands and magical creatures. But Charity harbored a secret that would have terrified those who trusted her with their precious offspring. She remembered everything. She remembered the water ceremonies of her homeland, the ancient rituals where river spirits demanded blood payment for cosmic balance. She remembered her mother's teachings about justice that transcends human law, about debts that can only be paid in the currency of souls. Most dangerously of all, she remembered what Master Thornton had done to her own children. 3 times, Charity had given birth on that plantation. 3 times, she had felt the overwhelming love that only a mother can know. And 3 times, Master Thornton had ripped her babies from her arms and sold them downriver before she could even properly hold them. The last time when her youngest, a beautiful girl she had secretly named Susanna, was only 2 days old, Charity had begged on her knees for Thornton to let her keep just 1 child. His response would haunt her dreams and fuel her vengeance. Black women don't need children cluttering up my plantation. You're here to work, not breed. That was when something fundamental broke inside Charity. Not her spirit, but her humanity. The maternal love that had nowhere to go transformed into something far more dangerous. Maternal rage with the patience of a crocodile and the memory of an elephant. For 3 years, she had watched Master Thornton dote on his own 3 children, Rebecca, age 8, Jonathan Jr., age 6, and little Mary, age 4, while the ghost of her own stolen babies whispered in her ears at night. Master Thornton's children were beautiful, innocent creatures who had done nothing wrong, except be born to a monster. Rebecca had her father's piercing blue eyes, but her late mother's gentle heart. Jonathan Jr. was a curious, energetic boy who followed Charity around the laundry, asking endless questions about everything. Little Mary was barely more than a baby herself, with golden curls and a laugh that could melt the hardest heart. Charity loved them, genuinely loved them, which made what she was planning even more devastating. The plan had been forming in Charity's mind for months, but it crystallized on Good Friday when Master Thornton made an announcement that would seal his children's fate He had arranged to sell 3 more enslaved families downriver, including Sarah and her newborn twins. As Charity watched Sarah's anguished face, she saw her own reflection from 3 years ago, a mother being systematically destroyed by a man who viewed human love as an inconvenience to his profit margins. That night, as Charity knelt beside her bed in the slave quarters, she didn't pray to the Christian God who had failed to protect her babies. Instead, she whispered to older spirits, river spirits who understood that some injustices required blood payment. She asked her ancestors to forgive what she was about to do, and she made a covenant with powers that existed long before Jesus walked on water. Easter Sunday dawned with the kind of perfect spring morning that made believers thank God for His creation. The Thornton family attended sunrise service at the White Presbyterian Church, while the enslaved people gathered for their own worship in the plantation chapel. Charity sat in the back pew, listening to the preacher talk about resurrection and redemption, but hearing only the whispers of her murdered children calling for justice. After church, as was traditional, the Thornton children came to find Charity for their Easter egg hunt by the river. They trusted her completely. She had been their surrogate mother since their own mother died in childbirth with Mary. They followed her laughing and chattering down to the riverbank, where colorful eggs were hidden among the reeds and willows. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as the most horrific perversion of Christian symbolism ever recorded in Georgia. Charity led the children deeper into the river, ostensibly to search for eggs hidden in the shallow water, but as they waded in, something changed in her demeanor. The loving woman who had cared for them for years transformed into something ancient and implacable. "Children," she said in a voice that carried the weight of ancestral grief. "Today we're going to learn about a different kind of baptism, a baptism that washes away the sins of fathers through the sacrifice of innocence." Rebecca, the eldest, was the first to sense danger. "Miss Charity, what do you mean? You're scaring us." Charity's response would echo through the annals of American horror. "Your daddy took my babies and sent them to die in chains. Now my babies want playmates in the water. The river spirits are hungry for Thornton blood, and only Thornton blood will satisfy them." What followed was 18 minutes of systematic drowning that perverted every symbol of Easter resurrection into a ritual of revenge. Charity held each child under the water while reciting not Christian prayers, but ancient West African incantations that called upon river spirits to accept these offerings and grant peace to her murdered offspring. Little Mary went first. Charity held her gently, almost lovingly, as the 4-year-old struggled briefly before the river claimed her. "This is for Nkosazana," Charity whispered as bubbles stopped rising to the surface. "Now you can play together in the spirit world." Jonathan Jr. was next, the curious boy who had asked so many questions about life and death. As Charity pushed his head beneath the muddy water, she answered his final, unspoken question. "This is for Quame, my little warrior who never got to grow up and be strong like you." Rebecca, the eldest, understood what was happening and fought desperately to reach the shore. But Charity was stronger, fueled by 3 years of accumulated maternal rage. As she held the 8-year-old under the water, she spoke to her first stolen child. "This is for Adana, my beautiful girl who would have been your age if your father hadn't sold her to the sugar fields to die." When it was over, Charity stood waist deep in the river with 3 small bodies floating around her like grotesque water lilies. She raised her arms to the Easter sky and let out a wail that witnesses later described as the sound of a mother's love turning inside out, a sound so primal and anguished that even the plantation dogs began to howl in sympathy. But here's what makes this story even more chilling. Charity didn't try to run. She carefully arranged the children's bodies in a circle on the riverbank, positioning their hands as if they were holding hands in prayer. She braided water reeds into their hair and placed wild Easter lilies on their chests. Then she sat down in the center of the circle and waited for Master Thornton to discover his new reality. The screams that erupted from the plantation house when the bodies were found could be heard for miles. Master Thornton's anguish was so complete, so soul-destroying, that witnesses said he aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He collapsed beside his children's bodies, sobbing and raging in equal measure, finally understanding the depth of loss that he had inflicted on others without a second thought. When the sheriff arrived to arrest Charity, she was still sitting calmly beside the children, humming what sounded like a lullaby, but was actually a West African funeral song. She showed no remorse, no recognition that she had done anything wrong. When asked why she had murdered innocent children, her response chilled everyone present. Innocent? They were born of guilty blood. Their father planted seeds of evil, and I harvested his crop. The river spirits demanded Thornton children to balance the scales, and I gave them what they required. The trial of Charity became a sensation throughout the South, not just for the horror of her crime, but for the theological questions it raised. How could a woman who had shown such love and gentleness transform into something so monstrous? Was this divine justice or demonic possession? Had slavery itself created this monster, or had she always been one? The prosecution painted her as the embodiment of savage African barbarism, proof that enslaved people could never be truly civilized or trusted. But the defense, led by a young lawyer who would later become a famous abolitionist, argued that slavery had driven her insane, that Master Thornton's systematic destruction of her maternal bonds had created a psychological break so severe that she could no longer distinguish between love and vengeance. The enslaved community was divided in their response to Charity's actions. Some saw her as a monster who had murdered innocent children. Others viewed her as an avenging angel who had finally made a white master pay the same price that enslaved mothers paid daily. But all agreed on one thing: she had changed the power dynamic forever. No longer could white families assume that their enslaved caretakers were harmless, grateful servants. Charity had proven that maternal love, when twisted by sufficient trauma, could become the most dangerous force on earth. Master Thornton never recovered from the loss of his children. Within 6 months, he had sold the plantation and moved north, but the guilt and grief followed him. He became a broken man who spent his remaining years writing letters to abolitionists, confessing his sins and begging for forgiveness that would never come. He died alone in a Boston boarding house in 1863, clutching a photograph of his drowned children and mumbling Charity's name. Charity was executed on December 21st, 1859, the winter solstice, when darkness reaches its peak, but even in death, she remained unrepentant. Her final words from the gallows would become legend among the enslaved. I go to join my children in the water world, where Thornton children now serve as my children served. The river spirits have been satisfied, and the balance has been restored. The psychological impact of Charity's revenge rippled through Southern society like shockwaves. Plantation families began to look at their enslaved caretakers with new suspicion and fear. The woman who cooked their food, the man who tended their children, the trusted house servants who had access to their most intimate spaces, any of them could be the next Charity, nursing grievances and planning revenge. More importantly, Charity's story forced a reckoning with the fundamental cruelty of slavery's assault on family bonds. White society had always known, intellectually, that enslaved families were separated and destroyed. But Charity's revenge made that abstract knowledge viscerally real. She had shown them exactly what it felt like to have your children ripped away, to experience the soul-destroying grief of losing the most precious thing in your life. The children who died that Easter Sunday became symbols of the thousands of enslaved children who had been torn from their families and sold into misery and death. Charity's act of revenge, horrific as it was, illuminated the even greater horror of a system that treated human love as a commodity to be bought and sold. What makes Charity's story so profoundly disturbing is the way it perverts every symbol of hope and redemption. Easter Sunday, the holiest day in Christianity, became the day when maternal love transformed into maternal vengeance. The river, symbol of baptism and spiritual cleansing, became an instrument of drowning and death. The innocent children, representing hope and future, became sacrificial offerings to balance cosmic injustice. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Charity's revenge is how it reveals the true nature of justice under slavery. In a system where enslaved people had no legal recourse, where their suffering meant nothing and their families could be destroyed at will, cosmic justice could only be achieved through cosmic horror. Charity became both judge and executioner, using her own damnation to purchase a twisted form of balance. The water ceremony that Charity performed that Easter morning was not Christian baptism, but something far older, a return to pre-Christian concepts of justice that demanded blood for blood, child for child, life for the child, life for life. She had reached back to her African spiritual roots to find a form of justice that white law and Christian mercy had denied her. Today, nearly 165 years later, Charity's story still haunts us because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about justice, revenge, and the limits of human endurance. Was she a monster who murdered innocent children? Was she a victim, driven insane by systematic trauma? Was she an agent of divine justice operating outside the bounds of human law? The answer probably depends on whether you identify more with the grieving mother or the murdered children. What we can say with certainty is that Charity's revenge represents the ultimate perversion of maternal love. She loved Master Thornton's children genuinely, which made her betrayal all the more devastating. She used their trust, their affection, their complete vulnerability to exact a price that would destroy their father as completely as he had destroyed her. The river that claimed those 3 children became a symbol of the dark waters that slavery had created in American society. Waters where love and hate, protection and destruction, salvation and damnation flowed together in currents too complex for human understanding. Charity's Easter baptism was not a ceremony of resurrection, but of retribution, not a promise of eternal life, but a guarantee of eternal grief. Think about the theological implications of what Charity did. She chose damnation to purchase justice, traded her own soul to balance the scales of cosmic equity. In her worldview, shaped by both African spirituality and American trauma, some injustices were so great that they could only be answered by equally great counter-injustices. She became evil to punish evil, embraced monstrosity to combat monstrosity. The children who died in the Savannah River that Easter morning were innocent victims of a war they never knew was being fought. But in Charity's mind, shaped by years of unbearable loss, they were also representatives of a system that viewed her own children as disposable property. Her revenge was not directed at them personally, but at what they represented, the continuation of a bloodline built on the destruction of other bloodlines. So the next time someone suggests that enslaved people accepted their condition passively, remember Charity, the Laundress, Charity, the Laundress. Remember the woman who turned Easter Sunday into a day of reckoning, who transformed the symbols of Christian redemption into instruments of pagan justice. Remember the mother whose love became so powerful that it curved back on itself and became indistinguishable from hate. If this story has moved you, if it's forced you to confront the buried truths about maternal love and cosmic justice, then I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because this is exactly the kind of story that mainstream history wants to forget. But here at Buried Truths, we're committed to digging up these stories and giving voice to those they tried to silence. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the true cost of systematic injustice. Leave a comment telling me what other buried truths you want me to uncover. And remember, the stories they buried are the ones that matter most because they're the ones with the power to change how we see the world. Charity's revenge lasted only 18 minutes, but its impact echoes through American history. She reminds us that maternal love is the most powerful force in human experience, powerful enough to create life, protect life, and yes, destroy life when that love is systematically betrayed. The waters of the Savannah River carried away more than 3 children that Easter Sunday. They carried away the comfortable fiction that enslaved people would forever accept the destruction of their families, without consequence. Until next time, keep digging for the truth, because the stories they buried are the ones we need to remember. This is Buried Truths, where we uncover the past to understand the present. The voices they silenced will be heard, and the love they destroyed will find its terrible, beautiful, vengeful voice. Remember Charity. Remember the Easter baptism. Remember that sometimes the deepest waters hide the darkest truths, and that maternal love, when betrayed, can become the most terrifying force in the universe.